rendering. So rendering is pretty simple. All you really need to do is once you finish your animation, you have to go through a bunch of different settings based on whatever you're trying to animate and what you want to render. And we're just going to go through the most basic settings for now. So what I have here is just a simple model with a nice animation put into it of him just fighting. And let's just say this is our finished product. So what I'm going to do is I want to render this out so we can start making it into a video. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure everything looks and fits into our screen. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to click on this icon right here to add a film gate. And what that does is it'll basically put in a gray border around wherever you won't see anything, and anything that's within that you'll see. So I'm just going to play through the animation again just to make sure everything fits. Normally you just want to check to make sure your character's not going off screen unless you want it to, and things like that. So everything looks good right there. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my render settings. So to get to your render settings, it's this little clipboard right here with a little gear next to it. I'm going to click that. So in render settings, it can be very daunting at first, but we're going to go and do things as easy as possible with some basic settings. So first things first, we're going to use Maya software. You could use other renderers, but Maya software will render in most cases the fastest. And for what we're trying to do for this example, we're going to want that. So I'm going to hit render using Maya software. Color match, we're not going to pay attention to. File output, this is where things get extremely important. So the image format, we're going to want to do either a TIFF or a JPEG. It really depends on what you want to do. A TIFF has an alpha layer, which means the background, since we don't have anything in the background, will be black, so you could put things behind it as if you were doing a green screen. A JPEG will just be a flat image. It will render a little bit faster as a JPEG, but it's really up to you. I'm going to render as a JPEG right now since I don't plan on putting anything in the background, but if you want to put something in the background, you'd use a TIFF. So the next thing that's important is frame/animation extension. So what that means is basically how it's going to render out and save the file. So if we look right here, we have the path where it's going to save it. Normally I'd have it, I'm going to probably set that somewhere else. I'll actually do that right now. So I'm just going to set my project to my desktop for this example. I'll create a default workspace, so I'll change it just so it's easier to find. So the important thing is this extension. If you mess this up, your animation's not going to render properly and you will end up having to render it a couple of times. So as of right now, this project is called untitled.jpg, which means for one frame it's going to be that, which is definitely not what we want. What we want is something set as name.number.extension. And the reason we're doing that is because we need to have our stuff rendered properly. .number.extension. What I'm going to do right now, just quickly bring up this. And what we have is untitled. And since I'm doing a JPEG, JPG, oops, JPEG. So this is not going to suffice as our animation. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to change those settings up. So I'm changing the name.number.extension. So if we look at it right here, it's now entitled .0001.jpg for the file name. So let us go back over here. So what I'll end up doing is, let me just get rid of this area. So titled .0001.jpg. And then it's going to go to, since I currently have it to end at 10 frames, we'll have it at 10. So the reason why name.number.extension is important is because we want to have a number to signify, hey, this is frame 1, this is frame 2, this is frame 3, and so on and so forth until we hit the end of our animation. So the next thing we're going to work on is frame padding. What frame padding is it's basically the amount of digits we have to work with. So if you see that I have frame padding as 4 currently set up, That means it says untitled.0001.jpg. If I change this to, let's just say 3, as you can see, you'll get rid of one of those digits. And the reason that's important, so let me get back to Photoshop, is let's just say I had like 120 frames. What that means is, in this case up here, if I had, let's say, a frame padding of, let me write this down for you. A frame padding at 4. What that means is the first frame is going to be called untitled.0001.jpg, which means the 120th frame, it will be untitled.0120.jpg. And the reason why the frame padding is very important is, let's just say, let me get rid of this, and let me get rid of this. Let's just say I had a frame padding as 2. So that means my first frame is going to be untitled.01.jpg. Because the frame padding is 2, I only allowed 2 digits in the naming setup, which will work, but it'll only go up to, let's just say, it'll be untitled dot, and the last frame that would work properly would be 99.jpg. As soon as I hit 100, what it will do is it will save over, it would save it basically as, I'll fix that, untitled, let's just say at frame 100, it would name it as 10.jpg because I don't have that extra room for that digit. So what that means is I need to make sure I have the right amount of frame padding in order to get it. So in this case, if I had 120 frames, the proper amount would be 3, because then I could get to frame 120 without running into any problems. So this would be 01, that'd be 120. You could always go more than the amount of frames you have, but it's not really necessary. I usually just go either to the exact amount or add an extra one, most cases to the exact amount. And the way to know the exact amount is if we go over here, all you need to do is count the digits. So 120 frames is my animation, so frame padding 3. Good to go. So in this case, our frame padding is pretty good. So we'll have frame padding at 3. I have 120 frames. I'm going to show this animation. I'm going to move on to the next section. So the frame range. The frame range is basically when you want to start rendering and when you want to end rendering. So right now our start frame is at frame 1, which is usually the way we want to go. The end frame is at frame 10. We don't want frame 10 because I have 120 frames of animation. So I'm going to change that to 120. By frame, we're going to leave at 1. Some people can mess around with this and get very weird results. One good example is if you ever watched the Spider-Man Enter the Spider-Verse, they actually did frames by 2s, which gave a more comic booky stop motion effect. But we're going to go with frame 1 for, by frame 1 for now. So next thing we're going to do is renderable cameras, which in most cases you're just going to use perspective for now. That's usually just the easiest way to do it. If you start working with extra cameras later on, you could actually have it render different cameras at different times, but we can get to that later. Image size. So the image size is kind of important because it's basically how big you want your image to be. 540 would be fine for this class, or 1080 at the most. The bigger your bigger image you're going to render, the longer it's going to take, the bigger the size is going to be. So for this one, 540, more than enough. Everything else over here you don't really need to change. We're not going to go into here because we don't really need it. And now our render settings are done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close that. I'm going to save my project to my desktop. I'm going to name this test. Hit continue. That's going to rename it to test, so it's not untitled anymore. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my rendering tab. I'm going to go to render. and then render sequence. I'm going to go through the little option box just to make sure everything looks good. Normally when you have extra cameras, this gets a little messed up, so you just want to make sure it's the correct one. And I'm going to hit render sequence and close. And what's going to happen is it's now going to render each and every frame. Since I have a pretty fast computer, it's rendering really fast. So it's flickering right now. But essentially what it's doing is it's rendering every single image one right after another until it gets to the end. So I can now close this out. And after you get to that point, you don't really need to have Maya open anymore. So we can move on to compositing things together. So today what we're going to do is we're going to composite the animation that we rendered in the last video. So if I'm going to minimize this for now, I'm just going to go to that folder which is called images. And if I look through this, I'll have a temporary folder. And as you can see right here, I have all my frames pretty much in this folder right here, which is great. The only problem with that is we need to composite that into a video. So for this one, we're going to use After Effects. You can use a bunch of different video compositing programs, whatever you feel comfortable with. I usually just use After Effects because it's quick and easy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Import, File. I'm then going to go to my images folder, which I have all those images, and I'm going to click on the first one. I'm going to make sure import JPEG sequence is open, is selected, and I'm going to hit open. So now I have all my frames into one little spot right there, but the problem is my frame rate is set at 30. We're going to want to do it at 24 since we're going to be doing 24 frames per second. That's how we rendered it out. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to interpret footage, and then I'm going to click on main. And once this box comes up, the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on where it says assume this frame rate and type in 24 and hit OK. So now that that's all set up, I'm going to go and I can just drag this to the bottom right here. Actually, let me actually set it to my composition. I'll drag it down here. And that's going to add my object set for a composition. So if I just go to my preview of it, it should play through my animation, just like that. And that looks all good. So what I'm going to end up doing now, I'm just going to get prepped to render out. So I'm going to go to composition, I'm going to add it to my render queue, and it'll open up right here. So in my case, I'm just going to set it as a test.mov. You could save it as whatever you feel like for your own computer. Usually it'll be some form of video format, but for me, I'm just going to do MOV just because it'll be quick. Output module, I'll leave it at lossless for now. Normally you'll go through these settings for different color setups or anything like that, but we don't really need to work with that today. And all I really need to do is hit render. It's going to render through, it's going to make that noise. And what I should end up having is, if I go back to my desktop, is a nice test.mov. So mine doesn't really want to open with QuickTime, but I'll just open it with something else then. Let's see. VLC should work. So let me just give access to it. There we go. Let me just play through it once. And let's play it again. And we should be good to go. It's a little laggy right now, but it's probably because I'm not on the newest version. But that's pretty much all you need to do. And that's all there really is to it.